Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
In a four-piece band like Motley Crue, with a vocalist, bass, and drums, all the primary melodic sound is coming from the guitarist, Mick Mars. His sound is what defines Motley Crue. Stay tuned and discover where that sound originated, at least in California, where Motley Crue was born. Just about every story on Mick Mars mentions the unsuccessful failed bands in his pre-Motley Crue past. But that is far from the truth. Mick Mars was a very seasoned, veteran musician when he started the Motley Crue with Tommy, Vince, and Nicky. He had 10 years on each of them. There never would have been a Motley Crue without Mick Mars' experience. But nobody talks about where Mick got all that seasoning, until now. The roots of the Mick Mars musical tree can be traced back, oddly enough, to San Diego, California. More specifically, Ocean Beach, California, to a $10 a month garage inhabited by surfer and bass player Harry Clay, the man who suggested the band name Motley Crue in the first place. But the legacy goes back much further than that, starting with the guitar player George Patton living next door, and the tumultuous explosion he just recovered from with the utter collapse and implosion of his previous killer band in Hollywood joint session. And even much further than that, to a band called The Images in 1967. The Images were an 8-piece high school band specializing in dance music, primarily of the Motown and soul variety. They had 2 male and 2 female upfront vocalists, plus 4 instrumentalists. One of the lead vocalists was Pat Hawk. The band rehearsed at Pat's house, as her father Frank Hawk was the band's manager. When Frank brought in Jack Valentine on drums and George Patton on lead guitar, that started a musical partnership through 3 Southern California bands that lasted over half a decade. Frank had the band working regularly at local hotels, military bases, high school dances, and even got them a spot on the CBS affiliate TV8 Dance Time. The Images were also the backing band for the famous Motown band The Drifters of Under the Boardwalk and Up on the Roof fame when they played San Diego. The Images were following in the footsteps of soft rock hitmakers Gary Puckett and the Union Gap and the Cascades, both from San Diego.
So here I am, this 17-year-old punk kid wet behind the ears, and I'm playing on the same stage that the Dave Clark 5 were on this TV show. Yeah, me and George would just look at each other on stage in that little skinny black tie and a yellow dinner jacket, and I'd never had a tie on in my life.
Music was changing. Iron Butterfly came on the scene in San Diego and had a smash hit. Led Zeppelin, Iron Butterfly, they started a genre soon referred to as heavy metal.
We're playing military clubs, and every once in a while the singers couldn't sing. They had the flu, or for whatever reason we had to play 4-piece. They'd only maybe have about a dozen women in the whole place, and 80% of the audiences are all guys sitting in the back. And me and George would look at each other, and all of a sudden we'd whip into Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf.
I like smoking lightning, heavy metal thunder, racing with the wind, and the feeling that I'm under.
They'd walk off stage, and as a 3-piece, we'd knock this stuff out. It was really a neat change from just R&B all the time.
So it was 3-piece, it wasn't 4-piece. I guess the keyboard player didn't know the song, so Rich didn't join us.
No, it was just the three of us.
The three-piece was the real thing back then with Cream and Hendrix and that type of thing. It was just
The amps didn't go to 11 yet.
yeah.
But we did I Can See for Miles by The Who. We did some Hendrix, I think Fire.
Did Fire and Foxy Lady.
It was fun because it was a real change, but what was neat is you'd start playing these songs and you just see eyes kind of light up. And you'd see them kind of talking among themselves, and we'd actually get dancers out then, and that was really pretty cool.
George sang Foxy Lady by Jimi Hendrix. And that whole audience just went ape. That's something that they never heard played live before. All this music, all this new music in 67, 68, 69, we were playing it for them live. And this is the first time anybody had ever heard anything like that. We did You Really Got Me by the Kinks. We did Crossroads by Cream. And on a military base with 90% guys as your audience, they just went berserk. George and I looked at each other and a light bulb went off.
The Vietnam War tore the images apart as the four instrumentalists were all drafted or enlisted. George enlisted in the Marines and became a drill sergeant. Jack's Air Force enlistment was refused due to partial color blindness. Jack spent the next 2 years dodging the draft by going to college to play baseball and being a surf bum off the grid living in his van. After the Vietnam War, George tracked Jack down and invited him to join his new group, Joint Session. He found a guy with a Hammond B3 organ, so now Deep Purple covers would sound just like the record from the keyboard perspective. With George's huge sound and that organ setup, Joint Session took off like a rocket. Joint Session was based in the exclusive San Diego city of La Jolla, California. They had considerable monetary backing and soon found themselves recruited to record an anti-war song aimed at President Richard Nixon and the ensuing Republican National Convention slated in August at the San Diego Sports Arena. George had a screaming lead guitar solo, and Jack sang lead on a song titled Make Room San Diego. The band was whisked to a 7-bedroom house in Hollywood and spent over 6 months working on the song management thought was a sure hit. It was considered in the mold of the anti-war sentiment that put the band Chicago on the map during the 1968 riots at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago. Joint Session started counting success before it happened. Jack got married to his high school sweetheart, Patty, and now shared a 7-bedroom house with the band in Hollywood. This new lifestyle had them soon engulfed in the Hollywood drug scene. Free drugs were plentiful somehow.
Our producers put together a big rock show at the outdoor Balboa Stadium in San Diego. What a perfect way to promote the record. Joint Session would be opening for The Doors, Cold Blood, Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, Stoneground, Boone's Farm, Canned Heat.
President Richard Nixon was known as Tricky Dick. One of his most strategic tricks was to have the anti-war protesters think the convention was going to be in San Diego, and at the 11th hour, move it all to Miami to throw off pre-organized protests in San Diego. The song, the record deal, the band, and Jack's marriage of only 2 months all went down the drain.
Jim Morrison passed away, and The doors got dropped from the show. And once word came down the convention was moving to Miami, yeah, we just got kicked to the curb. Everything was just going downhill real fast.
In a desperate effort to breathe new life into a shell-shocked band, Joint Session brought in David Day as a second lead guitarist. David Day was a recording artist, vocalist, bass player with The Frantics. The Frantics had a gatefold album released on the notorious Lizard record label and had open shows for the likes of The Who and the Yardbirds. David fit into Joint Session like a puzzle piece. He gave the band a fourth vocalist and added guitar talent. The dueling lead guitars of bands like the Allman Brothers or Wishbone Ash might salvage a sinking ship, but it was too late. Joint Session fell out of the sky like a plane crash.
Yeah, I don't know what David Day must have thought. He came in at a weird time. He missed all the fireworks. But here's a guy we looked at as some big rock star, man. He'd played with The Who. He'd played with the Yardbirds. Got a couple years on us. He had so much more experience than any of us. He could sing lead, he could play keyboards, he could play lead guitar. There was our magical second lead guitar that could duel with George.
A whirlwind hangover of 2 months came to an end when George and Jack found themselves homeless back in San Diego. Jack moved back in with his mother, and George found a cheap apartment in Ocean Beach. It wasn't long till George asked Jack to join a new band he was starting gigging at some of the old Joint Session stomping grounds, with Harry, the bass player from a band called Cat's Eye, living in that garage next door. Jack agreed under one condition.
So we're playing all the same old Joint Session clubs, and I just insisted we'd not be called Joint Session. I planned on revitalizing Joint Session without George. When he got back from Vietnam, he was a totally different person. I couldn't trust him anymore. He drank too much, and he got turned into a thief. We'd be playing gigs on the military bases, and he'd go into the storeroom and steal the bar stools. He says, well, the government owes me. They made me waste 2 years of my life in Vietnam. So the way I looked at it, I went from being an independently wealthy, bankrolled band to playing with a guy living in a $10 garage. So Harry and George had been rehearsing. The first time I met Harry was at the gig, and I had no interest in playing with these guys. I showed up at the gig with only half of my drum set 10 minutes before we had to play. I didn't say a word to Harry all night long. He looked over at George and he says, who is this unprofessional creep that you brought in here? When Harry suggested the name Motley Crue, I just mocked him for it. We did a set, and I'd say, hey, good evening, everybody, we're Motley Crue. The next set, I'd say, good evening, everybody, we're the Dirtbags. Next set, I'd say, good evening, everybody, we're Roadkill, or the Rotting Carcasses, or anything that was ultra negative to prove to him that the name Motley Crue just sucked. Yeah, for 2 weeks we didn't have a name except for Motley Crue or anything else I could come up with to mock Harry. Then he came up with the name Fat City, and we used that for another 2 weeks, and I thought that was worse. I had visions of an album cover full of obese people. But I gotta hand it to you, Harry, you were right and I was wrong, because Motley Crue became a household name in rock and roll history thanks to you. Next thing you know, David Day moves to Ocean Beach and joins the band, and then Harry brings in the lead singer from Cat's Eye, and the next thing you know, boy, we're starting to play some really good clubs.
The Joint Session chemistry was still there, and very soon this still virtually unnamed band was offered the house residency at San Diego's top showcase venue called Wallbangers. But to play there, they had to pick a classy name, join the Musicians Union, and claim to be from Hollywood. Just back from the Vietnam War, and with all the free beer playing bars, in no time George became a raging alcoholic. Soon he became drinking buddies with Wallbangers management, and anybody he could coerce to sign contracts over a pitcher of beer. During a band meeting over a bottle of Whitehorse scotch, the name Whitehorse was suggested. Nobody loved it, but nobody hated it. So Whitehorse was adopted. The name Mötley Crüe was discarded. That is, unless the band had to sneak into San Diego and play non-union jobs under an alias. Wallbangers put Whitehorse on the road to their string of clubs as far away as Seattle, Washington. Whitehorse opened for many top-name acts all over the West Coast, but soon gained the reputation as a tough act to follow. Whitehorse had 5 lead singers, 3 guys who played keys, 2 guys who could play drums, and the 2 dueling lead guitarists.
Thank you very much. Cold Blood will be on in about half an hour or so.
George's drinking problems were becoming readily apparent to everybody but himself. We were going to open a great show in Fresno for Dr. John and the Night Trippers, Sylvester and the Hot Band, and straight from the Walrus Saloon, the biggest biker bar in Fresno, that Hollywood band Whitehorse. Yeah, we opened the show and those biker guys all showed up and they just rooted and hooted and hollering because we were playing at Mach 10 in a big doggone convention hall instead of that little bar.
Came out to Montreal on the Lake Geneva shoreline to make records with a mobile, yeah. We didn't have much time. You're so young, well, you're an old man. It's just a boy. Oh, I'm really gonna run this town. Bow, bow, bow. I'm really gonna run this.
And who followed us up on the stage but Sylvester and the Hot Band? There couldn't have been a bigger mismatch of musical styles if Frank Zappa opened for the Monkees. Sylvester and the Hot Band were these cross-dressers from San Francisco blatantly putting their homosexuality in the face of all those bikers. Sylvester and the Hot Band probably didn't play more than 3 songs before they got pelted with bottles and shoes and anything the bikers could throw at them on stage. They were lucky to get out of there without being lynched like in an old Western movie. And then they were followed by Dr. John and the Night Trippers, who were from New Orleans. And Dr. John was guilty by association with all their chiffon feathers and flamboyant New Orleans-style music. When Dr. John came on, he didn't have a chance. And the bikers got one look at that and just started catcalling them. And a lot of us were going, no, give him a chance, give him a chance. We were trying to get the audience to just, listen. But it didn't help. About 4 or 5 songs in, Dr. John whipped into his hit song at the time, I'm in the right place at the right time.
I've been in the right place, but it must have been a wrong time. My head is in a bad place, but I'm having such a good time.
And after actually being booed off the stage, literally, as Dr. John's walking past George and I standing on the edge of the stage, and I'm just got my head down like, sorry, man, and George says, you must have been in the wrong place at the right time, just mocking him to his face. My heart sank. I felt so sorry for Dr. John. I felt so sorry for Whitehorse. We were embarrassed. He was embarrassed. That was the final straw for George. George's days in Whitehorse were going to have to come to an end soon.
After the incident with Dr. John, Jack started keeping a close eye on George, and he did not like what he saw. George was drinking too much, making all the deals, supposedly paying all the bills, but nobody but George saw the contracts or knew what the band was actually making. Jack's mother, Doris, alerted Jack the bills from her friend Johnny Miner's equipment rentals were going unpaid. Doris had co-signed for Whitehorse band equipment that were way past due. She was now having to pay bills George told Jack he had paid. Jack knew it was time to replace this talented alcoholic with someone sober.
But how in the wide world of sports were we going to do that? The only guy in L.A. that could possibly fill George's shoes was this new hotshot kid we'd bumped into a few times in a band called Mammoth, a kid named Eddie Van Halen. But if word got out to George we were auditioning new guitar players, the whole thing literally would have blown up into pieces. So we had to do it all behind George's back on the sly, find some nobody guitar player that nobody even knew, and secretly try to bring him into the band behind George's back.
Bob Deal, soon to become Mick Mars, was 23 years old, an unemployed, broke father of two, living in a shed in Garden Grove, California. He followed Whitehorse every time they played a club in nearby Costa Mesa called Pier 11. Little did Bob know he would soon be the guitarist to replace George in what was now one of the top 3 unsigned, steadily working bands in L.A. But Bob was homeless, with no working equipment, or even any stage clothes. He was so down and out and virtually unknown that Whitehorse could sneak him into the band and rehearse in secret, and George would never be the wiser. Whitehorse booked a 4-month tour of Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico without George's knowledge. This also rendered George homeless, as the Whitehorse equipment truck was his primary residence when between girlfriends. Whitehorse was galloping full speed to Friday and Saturday's nightclub in Phoenix August 21, 1973, with Mick Mars earning roadie wages. David Day's bandmate in the Frantics and studio guitarist for Flash Cadillac, Kim Sherman, was contracted to bail out Whitehorse until Mick was ready. Whitehorse had Mick on an allowance to save earnings to repair his equipment and buy him stage clothes and platform shoes. August 28, 1973, Mick took the stage for the first time in Whitehorse, sitting in on Kim Sherman's equipment, playing Whiskey River by Budgie. After 1 week, Mick had a full set under his belt. After the second week, he could cover half the night. But Whitehorse did 6 sets a night. That was an impossible amount to cover for a guy that had probably not played 6 sets in his life, much less 6 sets in one night. Whitehorse opened at Mr. Lucky's in Denver, September 11th, 1973. 6 sets, 6 days a week, for 5 weeks. Mick discovered something new, an income. With the constant tutoring of David Day and Kim Sherman, Mick Mars had effectively filled George's shoes and cloned George's style and sound. After 3 weeks at Lucky's, Mick took over full-time. October 2nd, 1973. Mick was now able to afford splitting a motel room with David instead of spending nights on the free floor of Jack's van. When Whitehorse returned after 4 months, George was nowhere to be found. The Hollywood parties shifted to the Flash Cadillac house, a 3-story, 8-bedroom house that was the real-life Animal House. No telling what Hollywood stars you would bump into in a revolving door of continual musicians and Hollywood actors coming and going at all hours of the day and night. Flash Cadillac and the Continental Kids was discovered by George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, and had roles in the movies American Graffiti, Apocalypse Now, and the TV shows Happy Days and The Midnight Special. Fame and fortune were closing in all around Whitehorse, just about the time Jack wanted out.
Well, we all could see what was happening in Europe. This new dance craze was taking over that was soon to be called disco. All the way through 1974, Whitehorse was performing the second British wave of progressive music that most bands couldn't pull off. Rare Bird, Wishbone Ash, Budgie, Deep Purple, Trapeze, Queen, Moody Blues, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I was just digging it. I was just in it to make music. Then 1975 rolled around and I looked over watching Mick Mars playing Earth, Wind and Fire and Stevie Wonder, and it just didn't fit. It just didn't work. We weren't cut out for that. This whole dance craze was now kicking in Europe, and it was heading this way. I felt like I was devolving back into Images days of '67. The record company seemed to be putting a big ball and chain around me and Mick Mars. It would soon turn into disco. Whitehorse was in Sound City recording studio recording our original song Sleaze Queen, before Sound City got famous and everyone started recording there.
This is one of our own tunes. It's called Sleaze Queen. All our friends. Go!
Right next door was Fleetwood Mac recording Rhiannon. We stuck our head inside the door and heard a brand new hit song as it was being made. They wanted me to play real simple drums, and they didn't want much heavy metal guitar. And I got nothing against dance music, but the drumming is very basic and boring, and you can teach a monkey how to do that. But I saw Iron Butterfly after that big smash of theirs, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, and those guys didn't make a nickel. They all wound up broke. The drummer for Buffalo Springfield, Dewey Martin, was a homeless drunk living at the Flash Cadillac house. If I wasn't going to make any money, I sure wanted to make music. I was asking God, get me out of here. If you don't want me here, get me out of here. And on November 16th, 1975, I broke my leg playing baseball.
We were in a record deal, and our managers saw disco as the next big thing. We want you guys to put 3 disco songs on your album. Mick and I said no. We're not doing that.
We were a ballsy rock and roll band, and we weren't going to settle for anything less than that. Things just kind of fell apart after that.
Jack Valentine, the drummer, felt that our music was being pushed to commercial. And the drummer, who played upside down, was a progressive rock freak. He loved Gentle Giant. They're very good musicians. And so we had artistic differences, and he quit. Jack Valentine, the original drummer for Whitehorse, who was probably Bob Dylan's best friend, dreamed up bolting down all his drums to a wooden platform that was kind of like a garage door that laid down flat on the ground, and he invented this drum cage that would lift his drums sideways up and over and suspend him upside down, and he would play for the last 5-6 minutes on our finale completely upside down, double bass, full tilt.
That really sounds like another drummer that I've heard of.
And Mick Mars, Bob Dylan, helped Jack fabricate and do all the welding on that cage in our garage in Huntington Beach. Mick Mars told Tommy Lee about it probably in 82 or 83, and that's how Tommy got the idea.
And I saw you guys in Aurora, Colorado one night when you were playing like 6 sets. Because I used to come out and see you guys play when I could. I'd come out and see Whitehorse.
You ever see the Upside Down Drum Show?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Really?
That's a hard image to get out of your brain.
The Mick Mars dues, saying stories, resplendent on the internet, do not tell the story of Whitehorse and the band that groomed him for stardom. Stories of Mick Mars struggling with unsuccessful bands prior to Motley Crue detail the decade Mick spent after the demise of Whitehorse once disco took over. Mick Mars did not make Whitehorse. Whitehorse made Mick Mars. Vince Neil, Tommy Lee, and Nikki Sixx might have found another guitarist and made it big, but the band might not have had the aggressive Mick Mars George Patton sound, the flying drummer, or the name Motley Crue, because all of those came directly from Whitehorse a decade earlier.
Whitehorse might not have given birth to Motley Crue, But the band, the Frantics, specifically Kim Sherman and David Day, and Whitehorse, certainly were the embryo.